Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. I'll complete with one last question, and then before we move through participants, I expect to make some comments for their benefit with respect to timing and the situation we're in terms of completing this evidence today, which is vital. The final question I have for the panel, and this, if I have my sequence right, should go first to Mr. Morley. The department has a number of consultative processes with the commercial sector. One of the primary ones is the CSAB. What is your best advice on improvements that can be made or should be made to those processes?
Mr. Commissioner, the CSAB consultative process, I think suffers from the issue that we tend to get bogged down in dealing again with issues that impact on shares, interest sectoral shares issues and allocation and a whole range of things that cause us to have problems within the sector, and it really makes it difficult to move forward because the way it's set up is that we operate on the basis of consensus, and no group will be sort of put under the bus by the rest of the groups there. And I think that unless and until we get a sort of fix for that end of the business, i.e. intersectoral allocation, that I think it's going to continue to be a problem to have that group move forward. We certainly have the ability, when we're dealing with common issues that impact on the total commercial sector, can do good work and make progress. But so many things that come back to dealing with fishing plans that impact on the allocation issue, it makes it very difficult for that group to function. In addition, the group is not well supported by the department. Other advisory processes are provided with funding so that people who are volunteering a lot of their time to go to these things and many meetings at least get their expenses defrayed for being at those meetings, and in some cases actually get an honorarium for being in the meetings. The CSAB gets none of that. Secondly, there are groups that also have a secretariat service provided that would take meeting notes and send that material out to people, and again, there's no funding for that for the CSAB as well, and I think that would make it operate more efficiently as well. So,
thank you, Ms. Scarfo.
Representation and consultation, which was one of the topics you wanted to talk about, are a very dear issue to my heart and to the people that I represent. The CSAB is one of the organizations where the Area Harvest Committee, an elected process, everybody gets a ballot, we get elected. The Harvest Committee then sends representation to the different panels that we're allowed to sit on. And I have had the honor of sitting on behalf of my fleet consistently for quite some years on the CSAB. I'd say for the most part, the CSAB is fairly ineffective, poorly funded, although I'm not a person who throws money at a problem. So I would say for all that the funding is an issue, it's not the core issue. The difficulty is we meet very rarely. Groups tend to feel that there is an advantage at working in the hallways with DFO rather than through industry, and there's many examples of that where we'll reach consensus within the meeting of the board. Groups go out, and because we're all pitted against each other, they'll change their position to something because there's been some understanding that there is some personal advantage to them to change that outside the room. I do have a problem with the representation because, and no offense, Morley, when I sit representing fishermen in the one forum where it's supposed to be fishermen, my fleet and all our individual independent fishermen have as much representation at the table, or can be vetoed basically by the large corporate companies. So it's not a fishermen's organization, it's not a fishermen's meeting room, and I have a problem with that. I understand the UFAWE being there. I think they represent individuals and quite well. We have the seat assigned for the large companies, which I don't understand, particularly when a lot of us don't sell to the large companies. A lot of us sell to these small independent companies that used to have a seat on the previous advisory board, which was the Commercial Fishing Industry Council, or through the other process that I'm quite familiar with, which was the Minister's Advisory Council prior to that. So if the makeup isn't fishermen, and it's a combination, then I get into the discussion then of, well, if it's going to be the combination, shouldn't you start making sure that you add some of those other seats? But when it comes to representation and consultation, which I think is the crux of what your question was, not just about the CSAB, because I don't think the CSAB is going to make any difference to Fraser River sockeye survival. There are major problems with the consultation processes that DFO engages with. And I think somebody told me the other day that on the West Coast alone, fisheries managers attend 160 different management consultation processes. Most of them, I would say, are meaningless. Most of them are presentations of PowerPoints that I could just as easily sit at home without incurring costs to look at. You very rarely get time to ask any meaningful questions because usually the room is too big or the person who actually made the presentation isn't there to answer the questions. So it's kind of meaningless consultation. It's window dressing. There's been a lot of work done over the years within the department and through the Auditor General reports and others talking about DFO's consultation processes and the needs for change and what meaningful consultation actually means. I've had the privilege of working with really good people, either on the West Coast through the Area Management Board, people like Craig Darling or Gordon Sloan, who can bring much more to the table to actually talk about how we co-manage and how meaningful decisions are made. But when it comes to representation, the Commercial Fishing Industry Council that we had before fell apart because of representation problems where groups went off and assumed to speak. They were handpicked by the department to sit on individual processes, excluded usually the participant that is going to be impacted, and then walked away saying they represented industry. That's happened on numerous occasions, Sports Priority being one of them, where a portion of the industry signed away saying they agreed on behalf of the industry that the commercial sports, not just individuals, ma and pa, but commercial recreational sports would have priority over those of us that actually have been making our living on it. The Commercial Industry Council fell apart because of that. Donna Petrochenko was the RDG at the time and said unless the board could become more representative and show that it was representative, she would not fund. And I think that kind of commitment from government, if they are going to fund, that there are guidelines. But the government handpicks who they want in processes, and I can personally speak to that on the fact that the Fraser panel, Area G, West Coast, Vancouver Island, and the communities have historically always had access to West Coast to stocks as they migrated past. The Fraser panel is made up of individuals representing Canada's interests, but they also represent individual stakeholder groups at the table. Since 1996, DFO has appointed individuals that are not supported by the region to sit in those processes. In fact, one individual didn't even bother attending the meetings. At this point, the representative that supposedly is sitting in the seat that would be occupied by Area G is an extra Area H harvester. So there is no representation, which means we don't even have access to the weekly data that is provided. We've raised the issue with the government. They handpick who they have as representation. So on the meaningful processes where representation is critical, DFO appoints whether that individual has support from the people they're supposedly representing or not. PST negotiations is another example, but we won't go there for today. But on the ones that are meaningless, where decisions doesn't really matter because they don't follow through anyway, they let the Harvest Committee pick.
Mr. Duncan, do you have comments on these processes?
Yes, I do. You want to rephrase your question? Because we kind of lost track with Kathy here.
No, that's fine. The question was simply, what is your best advice on improvements that can be made to these consultative processes?
That's a difficult one. essentially, I mean, it should be an all-inclusive process. However, you know, we were talking about CSAB. At least there's a consensus here that it has difficulty in working. And the Native Brotherhood pulled out of that process back in about 2006, if memory serves me correct, at a convention in Campbell River. And the way the Native Brotherhood works, its governance structure says that by resolution, it votes on a certain subject, and one of the topics, I can't remember the number, but one of the resolutions passed that year said they wanted out of CSAB. And it was the opinion of the person who proposed the motion on the floor and said they felt it was inadequate and wasn't meeting the needs of the members. So it was voted on, and it was carried, and that action was then carried to CSAB, whereby we withdrew. And to this day, we're still out of the picture, well, out of the CSAB picture, but not entirely out of the consultative process. But we're not intimately involved in that, but you know, we're peripherally involved in the IHPC. IHPC has a number of commercial seats, but they're all taken, so we're sitting on the sidelines there. So the level of interest is not there. So I was there from day one, but you know, we spent the first day with a lady named Pam Cooley, and we went through an exercise where we were going to develop the terms of reference for IHPC. We spent all day, and then at the end of the day, DFO came in and said, "Here they are." So, but they had a different version of it. So, but generally, you know, consultative mechanisms, they work if there's some trust, there's some honesty, I guess, this sort of thing between groups, and not so competitive. Because I think by nature, fishermen are competitive. I mean, that was the basis for the fishery until we got into this mode we're in now. And to a large extent, our members are very, very supportive of a commercial, competitive fishery. And what that means is the good fishermen get more of the fish and the others get less. But that's been the history of the competitive fishery. And so thus, therefore, they're not necessarily for ITQs because of that. Because their current ITQ structure, the share-based management approach DFO is imposing, or is attempting to impose, is that it does not recognize the catch history of individual fishermen. And it's fair to say that native fishermen have been at or near the top of production. I'm pretty sure Rob would agree with that in prior times. I mean, not necessarily today, because last year, sure, they went on a demonstration type fishery, but but I'm getting lost here now, but but we'll just leave it at that for now, I guess. So.
Thank you. Mr. Commissioner, that concludes my questions of the panel. What I'd like to do through addressing you is to address with Council the position we're all in with respect to the timing of this evidence. We're in a position where we must complete this evidence today. We don't have further hearing days available generally, and this business of spilling over or having cleanup days is far from optimal. In light of that, and at the risk of being even more of a whistleblower and a timekeeper for the folks in the room, what I'm proposing might make some sense for the time today. To complete today on my math, we would work to have time divided equitably among participants' council. Mr. Hickling and Mr. Harvey each act for members of this panel, and I think it's fair that they have some further time, more than other council might. My math is such that if they each had 25 minutes, that would see Mr. Harvey concluding before the midday breaks. Other participants would have 10 minutes each for their questions, and I appreciate that as a compressed period of time. It would, of course, this is in the context where it's the second panel. We have a background through the PPR and other evidence and material. If there were outstanding questions, if we're unable to complete on that schedule, or council having compressed to 10 minutes have a further question, we might then look to see if we could introduce evidence through questions put to the witnesses answered in writing as opposed to using hearing times. So I'd like to express that and welcome any direction that you have, Mr. Commissioner, on this question, and I'll be asking council to work within those confines that we face and to work to share their time or fit in the time that we have today.
Mr. Harvey's up next then?
He is. Thank you.
Yes. Chris Harvey for the Area G Trollers Association and the UFAWU. Mr. Commissioner, I will try to be as efficient as I can, but I don't think I can possibly carry out my responsibility in the time left between now and 12:30. I'll do my best. Ms. Scarfo, on the question of consultation, was the use of the PIC-Fee and ATP licenses, well, let me preface this. Out of the 160-odd Area G licenses, are there somewhere between 11 and 14 that have been purchased for reissuance to First Nations?
That's my understanding.
Yes. And was there a consensus reached in the SCORE process as to the terms and conditions of the licenses when reissued?
Yes, the SCORE process did come up with consensus recommendations on the allocation formula on how licenses would be transferred through both the ATP and PIC-Fee and any other transfer mechanism.
Yes. And was it basically that the terms and conditions on the license would remain the same once they were reissued to First Nations?
Yes, and if I can just elaborate on that, is that the premise was that when you buy a license, whether you buy it or I buy it or the judge buys it, what you get is what you bought, which is a license that has a list of conditions attached to it as to where you can fish, how you can fish, what the regulations are within that. The Department of Fisheries and Oceans was moving towards splitting that license up into its component parts and actually altering the condition of that license and moving them upriver, which obviously has significant not just allocation impacts, but regional fisheries impacts at the same time. Sorry.
And is the continued participation of First Nations in the West Coast Vancouver Island troll fishery a significant matter for West Coast Vancouver Island First Nations?
I wouldn't want to speak on their behalf, but everything that they've indicated to me and to the Area G fleet is that they work very closely with us. They're interested in continuing and expanding their participation in the fishery. We work very closely together and build towards the future, and that they see themselves as a major increasing stakeholder in that fishery as time goes by.
In fact, you mentioned that Chief Amos of the Hesquit Band is in the room today.
Yeah, yes, he is.
He is on your harvest committee, Area G Harvest Committee. Is that correct?
He's an advisor on the Harvest Committee and also on the society that handles any of the legal transactions for which we need a society.
And of course, he's an Area G troll license holder.
He is an active
Yes.
Area G fisherman.
Have the Howsett Band made repeated requests for the use of those licenses held in inventory under the PIC fee and ATP program?
It is my understanding that they have, and that they have also, within their fisheries group, been significant discussion on the use and misuse of the allocation that's associated with those licenses.
Yes. And have those licenses been granted to the Howsett First Nation or not?
To my understanding, no, and I think it was in the cross-examination under the PST that the indication was that they would not be granted to the new childhood.
And that what use would be made of them?
That those licenses would be divvied up and separated and moved up into particularly the Fraser River.
Yes. Mr. Duncan, I'd like to ask you some questions. You said you began in the fishery in 1958 and fished for a number of years after that. You've described all that. Can you just describe briefly the changes you've seen with respect to First Nations participation in the commercial fishery over the years and what it is today?
Well, I mean, I don't have the exact numbers, but there was considerable participation. The fleet size when I started was fairly significant. A lot of gillnetters. The seine fleet coast-wide, in that era, was about 225, between 225 and 250. The gillnet size was considerable. Same with the troll was quite considerable. So, over the years, that participation has declined. You can thank the Davis Plan, and more recently, Mifflin. But the new arrival on the scene has been DFO through its programs. I mean, they've always had the ATP program, and more recently, they're still in PIC fee. But there's also another player on DFO's camp, and that's AROM. And between these three initiatives, they're buying up a lot of licenses. I did get a report from DFO on this, and it's something in the order of about 350 to 400 licenses. Salmon licenses have been bought. And sure, there's been some movement out as far as F licenses have gone out, but that's coastal community. And I don't know the distribution of those right now, but it doesn't make up for licenses lost in the past. It's so.
What do you think of the idea of moving licenses to First Nations communities upriver, away from coastal First Nations communities?
I thought about that last night, and initially I was going to say it's not a good idea. But through the mixed stock fishery process that we have, sometimes those decisions by DFO allow that to happen. So in general, as long as the process is fair and determine when a terminal fishery will happen, generally I don't have a problem. But
All right.
but what's happened is that it has passed through coastal communities, and the value would have been much more considerable than inland, especially when you get up a couple hundred miles from the mouth here.
Yes. That's a question I wanted to put to Mr. Morley as well, from wearing your processor's hat for a minute. What are your views on moving commercial fishing, harvesting, and marketing upriver?
Mr. Commissioner, again, this comes back to my view that we should be trying to find a way that maximizes the potential income that this resource can drive to Canadians, and that, and also that we're really here talking about recommendations that you're going to make about sustainable fisheries. And sustainable fisheries rely not just on the underlying health of the ecosystem or the resource, but a sustainable fishery is one that is economically sustainable for the participants. And the issue and the concern I have here is that, and again, it gets back to a number of issues. When you send fish upriver and develop a new commercial fishery there, you are moving from a commercial opportunity that relies on a variety of fish populations to one that relies on if you're truly in a terminal area that a number of people are advocating, relies on a single population. And so we've had a lot of discussion here from a biological point of view on this portfolio effect of maintaining healthy and diverse populations. And the reality here is that the portfolio effect from the point of view of a sustainable economic commercial fishery is also important. And what you're actually doing is destabilizing a commercial fishery by ensuring that it relies on a single population in a terminal area, which is much more highly variable in terms of its amount from year to year and much more risky. And so from the point of view of what you're doing there is trying to develop a commercial activity in an upriver area where the fish are available less frequently and where that group who's fishing on that is relying on a single population. And if that population is reduced, their economic opportunities are reduced drastically. And they can't sort of say, okay, we're going to take conservation action on this population this year, and we're going to, instead of harvesting Fraser sockeye, we're going to concentrate on Barkley Sound sockeye, or we're going to concentrate on chum salmon in Johnston Straits, because they don't have that opportunity living in that one terminal area. So inherently, the fishing activity is less economically sustainable from the point of view of relying on a single, highly variable population. Secondly, from the point of view of, again, looking at that. In addition, we have also heard that in order to put fish upriver for an upriver fishery, given that there are fish that die on the way up the river due to environmental causes, warm water perhaps, or other things, that in order to transfer fish to develop a new commercial fishery upstream, you may have to transfer 1.5 or 2 fish out of a fishery at the mouth of the river, in the lower river, or in Johnston Straits in order to get 1 fish to that terminal fishery up the river. So you've got a loss of yield as well, just in the point of the number of fish that's available to that fishery. Thirdly, quite clearly, the market opportunities for the fish that are upriver are much more limited, and in the sense that the quality of the flesh itself provides fewer options in terms of products that could be produced, and certainly would not generate the potential income that can be generated from higher quality fish in the ocean fisheries. So it's, in my opinion, those fisheries, from the point of view of the amount of fish, the variability, and the quality, and the costs of implementing a new fishery up there are significant, that they are not as economically sustainable as fisheries that are not up the river.
Mr. Morley, I think I'm moving to a different subject, but I think you described last time you were here that the economic unit that you worked in formerly at DFO has basically been disbanded over the years. Is that correct?
Well, DFO has had many reorganizations, and certainly that was disbanded a long time ago. I think the concern I was mentioning, Mr. Commissioner, is that the focus on economic analysis of understanding of what is the socio-economic benefits that are derived from fisheries has not been a focus of attention for the department for a number of years, and the expertise is somewhat lacking in the department in terms of the number of people they have with that background.
Yes.
And that when they do economic analyses now, largely they contract it out to outsiders, but they don't have the internal resources in order to do the analyses or to provide that kind of advice to decision makers within the department.
Yes. On that subject, I'd like to refer you, Ms. Scarfo, to a report. Now, this has been moved into the ringtail somewhat late in the day, but I think it's a non-contentious matter. A report of the Standing Senate Committee on Fisheries and Oceans, interim report on Canada's new and evolving policy framework for managing fisheries and oceans. It's dated May 2005. Mr. Lund, have that. It was circulated to participants. I'm not sure whether it's
Yeah,
in...
Mr. Commissioner, I've alerted Mr. Harvey to this concern, and the concern is this: at 4 o'clock yesterday, I think his office circulated a series, 15 additional documents proposed to be put to the panels, and I've raised concerns about that, and concerns in particular if they're documents that aren't on ringtail and aren't part of the production record to participants. This is a document which may be of a different character if it's, in a sense, part of the public record. I believe we circulated that out to participants. I don't know right now whether that went to Mr. Lund or others as well. This is a document that's not on ringtail, I understand.
All right.
Mr. Commissioner, if I could just comment briefly. This is an issue with respect to document disclosure primarily, in the sense that Mr. Harvey has served us last night. I got to see them this morning. He sent them at after 5 o'clock last night. And there are 15 documents that are not on ringtail, which means he has not disclosed them through the pursuant to your order made November 2009. They're all non-ringtail documents. So it goes back to the issue of all participants fairly disclosing their documents and not cherry-picking them and serving them on other participants in the midst of the hearings. So I've not had an opportunity to review any of these documents with my client. So that's number one. And the second part is that, as I stated yesterday, is the document disclosure of 7 days in advance. And the prejudice to us is that I've not had a chance to review these with Jeff Grout. Jeff Grout testified yesterday. He hasn't seen these. If he starts pursuing these lines of documents, then we have to call Jeff Grout back to have him speak to any issues that may arise out of this late disclosure. So I just see a number of issues flowing from this. First of all, it's one of document disclosure generally, and second, it's the Commission's rules on fair notice to all participants. So in that regards, I'd object to these documents being utilized.
Well, this is a public document, and I suppose I could deal with it through the RDG panel at the end of the week or through other witnesses, but I thought it would. Well, I think what I'd like to do is just have it described at this point, at any rate, with this witness, maybe the most effective way of doing it, and then I'll have it, once it's in ringtail, we'll have it properly put to a DFO witness later, if that's acceptable. Yes, Ms. Scarfo, Standing Senate Committee report, interim report, on new and evolving policy framework. Is this something which contains a number of useful comments relating to the effects, among other things, the effects of ITQs?
Yeah, there's actually 3 reports that have been published by the Senate Committee on ITQs. The most recent one was the interim West Coast report on ITQs, where they identified a significant number of concerns that have arisen on ITQ fisheries from lessons that they've learned not only in New Zealand and Iceland, but also from East Coast fisheries, where they've tried to address them through the implementation of policies to protect the small boat independent fleet, including the owner-operator policy, which is very popular on the East Coast and in Alaska, and the fleet separation policy, which seems to have gone by the by here, where seine boats are trading fish with the small independent troll fleet. They recognize the importance of those, and they made some significant recommendations to the government, and those included some significant work to be done before proceeding any further with the implementation of any ITQs. The Nuu-chah-nulth, the West Coast Regional Management Board, Area G have all participated in those processes, and the Senate Committee actually has come out to BC and to our communities and talked to our fishermen and our regional districts and representatives about these issues.
Okay. And included in the recommendations was a recommendation that the DFO take into consideration socioeconomic impacts of its major decisions.
Yes, that's one of the main recommendations,
Yes.
is that there are, for all that we've heard some of the pros, of which I would actually love to debate at some point, the validity of some of these supposed benefits of the ITQ fishery. There are, regardless of whether I agree or disagree with those, there are some significant problems that arise out of those ITQ fisheries that need to be addressed before you implement them, because you cannot turn back once you've implemented them. It is not something that the small independent boat owner can get back into the fishery after you've implemented, so that the damage is irreversible. So the recommendations are quite significant to proceed with extreme caution and definitely take those steps before you contemplate going any further.
My next topic is the West Coast Vancouver Island Aquatic Management Board. Incidentally, you referred to an area management board. Did you mean the Aquatic Management Board?
Yeah, it evolved over time, so
All right.
previously it was known.
Now, one of the recommendations was that DFO make a firm commitment to fund the West Coast Vancouver Island Aquatic Management Board. Is that correct?
It's been a recommendation that's been fairly consistent throughout time, and yet long-term funding is still a critical issue, particularly if the board starts to look at what DFO feels are controversial issues like allocation, which are obviously very important to the regions.
Yes.
Then the issue of funding seems to raise its head very quickly.
Yes, and included in the report is a description that board was launched officially February 2002 as a 3-year pilot, a regionally based initiative involving several communities in the West Coast of Vancouver Island, which came together and have a formal place at the table in regard to fisheries, the first board of its kind in Canada. The AMB has taken on an integrated ecosystem approach to aquatic resource management and provided advice to the appropriate statutory authorities and aquatic resource policy, etc., etc. Does that accurately? And then it makes reference to the board describing to this committee very much a success story that is cost-effective vehicle for implementing Canada's Oceans Act, which we were told is, quote, fairly specific about the resources of Canada benefiting Canadians and especially coastal communities. The AMB is perhaps best known for having fostered a working relationship among the Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal fishing communities in the region. Is that a correct description?
It's a correct description, but I don't think it captures the essence of what it actually is. It's fairly phenomenal in that it is a truly integrated board that has people that would normally not even want to sit in the same room working together, and that has been developed predominantly because of overarching principles and objectives and a very clear vision and terms of reference that identify that for all that we all have conflicting interests, we do have some overriding areas of consensus, and that when we agree that we disagree, there's mechanisms in place as to how we actually address those disagreements. In my mind, it's a rather phenomenal board, and the efficiency and effect of that board within the region, I think, is rather dramatic, and is a model that could be picked up under the Oceans Act and has been used by DFO as a model of what they could do for ecosystem-based management within other areas.
What interests are represented on that board?
The commercial industry has a seat, the processing industry has a seat, the aquaculture industry has a seat, the recreational fleet has a seat, the First Nations, province, and federal government are the main players. The regional districts and governments have representation. NGOs, environmental groups, and secondary industries are also at that table. It's a pretty broad group of people that don't normally work together because of the competing interests.
I note the time.
Hearing is now adjourned until 2 p.m.